Hi folks, good evening. Welcome
good evening,
everyone.
everybody. Good evening.
Hello.
Thank you for joining. We'll just give it a few seconds to allow you all to come on in. Hello folks, welcome. Good evening, or good morning, in fact, if you're on another time zone. Thank you for joining us. It's lovely to see you all here. Okay, well, I think we'll make a start. Well, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the online Naturetrek Roadshow. I'm Sarah Frost, Naturetrek's marketing manager, speaking to you from Hampshire, where it's a crisp and chilly evening. I'm very happy to be inside for the night with a mug of tea. And we've had an exceptionally busy autumn at the Naturetrek office. We've got a record number of forward bookings for 2022. Never before have we had so many bookings for the year ahead as we have now, which is just fantastic. And we're seeing a huge demand for expedition cruises. So we're working very hard to lay on extra space for you. And one of our cruises that is particularly popular is our 3-week cruise to the Falklands, South Georgia, and the Antarctic Peninsula. And we were this close to getting this off the ground this month. Unfortunately, at the time, the FCDO advice wasn't in our favour, so our hands were tied and we were forced to sadly cancel it, which we were devastated about. Our guests should be out there right now enjoying it. And I know that some of you who are booked on the cruise have tuned in to watch this evening. And we can't wait to take you there in 2022 or 2024. And tonight should certainly whet your appetite if you haven't visited these destinations. These are some of the remotest places on Earth, and they're well worth visiting. We'll be covering 3 cruises this evening and 1 land-based trip, which is to the Falklands. And I've been fortunate to lead 2 of the cruises that we're featuring tonight. I've led both of our Spitsbergen cruises and our Norway cruise, which were just simply superb in their own right. And joining me to take us on this journey there are my 2 lovely colleagues, David Phillips and Paul Stanbury.
Hello.
Plus 2 of our wonderful tour leaders, Tim Melling, who'll be joining us later, and Kevin Elsby, who'll be sharing their experiences of traveling to these polar regions. Now, as always, folks, please do pop your questions in the Q&A sections at the bottom of the screen. Be it questions about generic travel and getting to the countries, or whether it's specific questions about the species that have been mentioned. We're very happy to take questions throughout the evening. We'll try and type responses to you, but we'll also take questions at the end at 9:05 after the last presentation has finished. So I hope you're all sitting comfortably with a glass of wine and some nibbles. And without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Paul, who is going to take us to Spitsbergen. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Just bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay. Almost there. Right. Oh, we don't want any security alerts. There we go. Right, yes, so good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. So I'm going to kick off our evening of polar cruising with a talk on one of my very favourite destinations, which is the island of Spitsbergen, up in the high Arctic. And over the years, I've been fortunate to go up to these islands on a few occasions, leading Naturetrek holidays up there, and every trip's been different. Every trip's been exciting. The wildlife, the landscape, it really is a spectacular spot. So where is Spitsbergen? So Spitsbergen is the largest island in the Svalbard archipelago. And it is located up in the high Arctic. I talk about 80 degrees north. It's quite easy to get to from the UK. Actually, we fly from London to Oslo, and then from Oslo up to the administrative capital, which is so Longyearbyen is here on the west side of the islands. In the off the big fjord of Isfjord, We run our Spitsbergen holidays at the end of June, early July. At this time of year, the ice has normally melted sufficiently to allow us to circumnavigate the island of Spitsbergen and to explore some of the areas which are entombed in ice for much of the year. And Spitsbergen, the wildlife and the climate here is very much controlled by the ocean currents. On the west coast of Spitsbergen is a little bit milder because the West Spitsbergen current, which is an extension of the Gulf Stream, peters out along the western side of the islands, and so the western sides are a little bit milder than the east and the north, which is very much controlled by the climate is controlled by the East Spitsbergen current, which comes down from the poles, North Pole, introducing very, very cold water into that region. So the ice tends to linker off the east and the west, so east and the north of the archipelago. So there's 4 main islands in the Svalbard archipelago. The largest, as I mentioned, is Spitsbergen. We've got Nordauslandet, which has the 3rd largest ice cap in the world after Greenland and Antarctica. And then on the eastern side, the islands of Edgeøya and Barentsøya. Then off way to the east, there's a group of little island called Kong Karlsland. That's one of the most important polar bear denning areas in the whole of the Arctic. But to say, we spend our first night in Oslo and then we fly up to Longyearbyen, and this is Longyearbyen, a pretty little Arctic town. It's a population of about a couple of thousand people, and you've normally got a couple of hours to wander around the town, explore the museum, and to look at some of the history there before we board the ship and begin the cruise itself. There's some interesting wildlife around Longyearbyen, so you'll get to see your first polar birds. The Arctic tern is common up in Svalbard, and of course these birds have those undertake the most amazing migrations every year. This is about as far north as they breed. They were up almost 80 degrees north here, and then in our winter time they migrate down to the southern hemisphere for a second summer down in Antarctica, so one of the furthest traveled of all birds. Along the little rivers and the little marsh areas on the edge of Longyearbyen, you've got a good chance of finding purple sandpipers. This is one of the commonest breeding wading birds up in Svalbard, and quite commonly seen in any areas where there's water and a bit of tundra for them to nest. And the little snow bunting as well. And this Longyearbyen, I actually find one of the best places in the whole of the islands to see snow buntings. They breed in the town, and they're commonly seen as you're wandering around. And interestingly, the population here splits in the winter time. Some birds move down and winter down in Asia. Others move south into Europe. So we explore Spitsbergen on our polar cruising. We're using 2 ships at the moment up in Svalbard. For the past couple of years, we've been using this one, which is the MS Quest, a really nice little ice strengthened vessel. Only takes 50 people, so it's a really nice small ship, very, very comfortable. Has a range of different cabins. So top right, you've got the more basic cabin type, which is perfectly comfortable twin cabin with windows. All the cabins have private facilities, and then you can upgrade your accommodation if you want to a double or to a superior. One of the other really nice things about the MS Quest is she's got an observation room right on the very top deck. So when you're not out on deck looking at the wildlife, you can be up in the observation lounge, just watching the world go by with a hot cup of coffee. And the other ship we use up in Spitsbergen is the Ortelius, MS Ortelius. And this is a slightly larger ship. She takes 100 people, but again, ice strengthened, very comfortable, and ideal for polar cruising. So for 22 and 23, we've chartered the MS Quest, and in 23, we've also taken a charter of the Ortelius. And that one I haven't quite launched as yet. I'm in the process of putting the information together. So And the great thing about the Ortelius cruise in 23 is it's going to be slightly longer than our traditional cruise. Most of our cruises are 9 nights, so 11 days in total for the holiday, 9-night cruise. On the Ortelius in 23, we'll be doing an 11-night cruise. So just that little bit longer. And the Ortelius, again, comfortable cabins. The top left, we've got the lowest grade cabin, which is a twin with window. Again, all cabins with private facilities, private toilet and shower. And again, you can upgrade. So below that, we've got the twin window cabin and a superior up top right. All the ships we use have enough Zodiac, so everybody can leave at the same time. There's no need to queue on any Naturetrek charter. So we charter these vessels, and we take full charter of the ships, fill them with Naturetrek clients, and operate them as dedicated wildlife voyages. And we bring our own tour leaders on board. And by chartering the whole vessel, not only can we make sure everybody on board is interested in wildlife, so with a bunch of kindred spirits for the holiday, but we can also dictate where the trip goes as well. So we'll make sure we take in the very best wildlife and scenery areas, and won't bother with some of the other landings that your standard cruises do. Like I've found over the years, standard Spitsbergen cruises tend to go in an inordinate number of trappers' huts, and really, once you've seen one trapper's hut, you've seen them all. But initially, we'll head north out of Longyearbyen up the west coast of Spitsbergen. So the west coast is a little bit milder than the eastern side. So you've got all the tundra vegetation here. You're cruising past this wonderful landscape of mountains and glaciers. Out on the tundra, there are lots of breeding barnacle geese. And these are the birds that winter down the Solway estuary. So the entire population of Svalbard breeding barnacles migrate down to the Solway estuary in Scotland to winter. We've also got plenty of common eider up here, nesting out on the tundra, and mixing amongst them, you've got to look through the flocks of common eider, because you've got a very good chance of seeing the spectacular king eider, which also nests up in Svalbard, but in much smaller numbers than the common eider. The beautiful little grey phalarope as well, a very badly named bird for us in the UK. The Americans call them red phalaropes, much better name for this wonderful birds. But in the breeding plumage, they're this lovely brick red colour, and they're common nesters up on the tundra. Of course, the phalaropes exhibit role reversal, where you have the females are brighter than the males, and the females display to the males, and the female will lay the eggs and the male will incubate the eggs and raise the chicks. So it's quite unusual to find a family grouping as we have with phalaropes here. So we've got the female in the background, the male in the foreground, and then two little chicks as well. There's one chick here and one other chick over to the left. Normally, by the time the chicks have hatched, the females have disappeared off either back out to sea where they winter or to find another male. The beautiful long-tailed skua nests up in Svalbard in small numbers. The commonest skuas are Arctic skuas, but there are small numbers of long-tails, and we'll take you to an area where they nest, as an island called Blomstrand, where they regularly nest. They're very, very confined. You get wonderfully close views of these very, very graceful birds. The botany up here as well is absolutely spectacular. We go, say, during that brief Arctic summer when the whole island just burst into life, the tundra becomes awash with different species of flower. Purple saxifrage here is very common. The beautiful boreal Jacob's ladder, which is a bit trickier to find, but one of the most spectacular flowers on the archipelago. And some more unusual species as well, the little whiplash saxifrage, also known as the spider plant. We'll make sure one of the Naturetrek tour leaders on board is good at their botany. So if you're really interested in the plants as well as the birds and mammals, you'll be well catered for by our tour leaders. There's only 2 species of mammal on the islands. We've got the Arctic fox and the Svalbard reindeer. And Svalbard reindeer is a particular subspecies endemic to the archipelago. Almost remind me of Shetland ponies with antlers, short stubby legs, and they're commonly seen around the coast and also up in the mountains while you're cruising around. Now, the islands don't have a huge diversity of bird life, but what they lack in diversity, they may more than make up for in the sheer number of individuals present. Millions of breeding pairs of auks, and the 2 commonest are Brunix guillemots and little auk. And this is a fantastic colony of Brunix guillemots at a place called Cape Fanshawe, Alkenfjellet auk cliffs. And there are tens of thousands of pairs of Brunix nest on this vertical dolerite cliff that rises vertically out of the water. And you get wonderful views of the birds. These are brunics here with the characteristic white slash along the bill line. And at this spot, you're sifting through thousands of brunics trying to find a common guillemot. And my favourite, the little auks. There's over 1 million pairs of little auks breed in Svalbard. Another real highlight is the opportunity to go to a little auk colony and sit amongst these wonderful little tennis ball sized birds. And like a lot of the wildlife, they're very confiding, and if you're quiet, you'll be surrounded by these wonderful little chittering, cackling auks. But in little auks and brunics, even when you're not at the colonies, you're seeing them continually flying back and forth past the boat in and out of their colonies. And wherever you're at a seabird colony, keep your eyes open for Arctic foxes. This is where they spend their summer months, scavenging at the base of seabird cliffs for eggs and chicks. And in the winter time, they head out to sea after following polar bears. As we go further north in Spitsbergen and we start to round the northern tip of Spitsbergen, crossing 80 degrees north, if the ice conditions allow, we'll poke into a wonderful fjord and go and look at the Monaco Glacier, one of the most spectacular and largest glaciers in the island. And this is backed by Spitsbergen. Spitsbergen means jagged mountain. It was named by the early explorers. I put this slide in just again to illustrate the distribution of ice. You can see the west coast free from ice due to the West Spitsbergen current. So on the 6th of May 2019, the ice was still pretty much entombed the north and the east of the archipelago, but that will break up over during May and June. And hopefully by the time our trip goes in late June, early July, there's enough space in the ice for us to poke our way through in our ice strengthened ships and circumnavigate the archipelago. But as we move over to the east of the islands, you lose the influence of the Gulf Stream, and the vegetation, there's less vegetation, more polar desert. Again, spectacular landscapes, some interesting birds and wildlife to be seen here as well. The Sabine's gulls like these very bleak polar desert-like environments to nest. There's only 5 to 10 pairs of sabines nesting in Spitsbergen each year, but a great place to see them is the little island of Moffen, where there's a walrus fallout and there's often sabines flying around there. As we cruise along the edge of Nordauslandet, you cruise along this massive edge of the ice cap. You can be cruising along a view like this for hours at a time. And then you're hopefully heading out into the pack ice. So both the ships we use, the Ortelius and the Quest, have ice strengthened hulls, so you can slowly push your way out into the pack. And out here, not only is it a wonderful experience to actually be out in the pack ice, slowly making your way through this incredible landscape. You're being followed by kittiwakes and fulmars, and there are line upon line of auks heading out to feed. A lot of the birds up here feed out in the pack ice. But I'd say not only are you enjoying this wonderful landscape, but you're going to get to see some of those real key, exciting high Arctic species that we're all looking for. This is the wonderful ivory gull. A bird that's restricted to the high Arctic, doesn't come any further south normally than about 72 degrees north. The adults is wonderful, pure, ghostly white color. Like the Arctic foxes in the winter time, they will follow polar bears and scavenge off the polar bear kills. In the summer, they will often come over to the ships and follow the ships. Out in the ice, you're also going to see hopefully a few seals. This is a bearded seal, the largest of the seals, the true seals that occur up in Spitsbergen. And wherever you've got your seals, then of course you've got to look out for polar bears. And this is obviously it's a cruise that's full of many highlights, but for many people, the key animal they want to see is the amazing polar bear. And there's about 2,000 polar bears in the Barents Sea population. They wander between Spitsbergen and the Russian islands of Franz Josef Land and Nova Zemlya. Of course, we can't guarantee you anything in the world of wildlife watching, but in all the years we've been operating Spitsbergen cruises, and that's since about the late 90s, we've only missed polar bears on one occasion, and that sadly because the ice was pretty thick on that particular cruise. You couldn't get into areas where the bears were, but normally touch wood, we normally see bears, normally get 5, 6, 7 sightings, and the east and the north of the islands are the best areas to look for the bears. Some are very inquisitive and they'll come right up to the ship, very, very close, and check you out. Others will take one look at the ship, turn and run in the opposite direction. But a wonderful highlight, and a fantastic course for photographers as well. The whole of the island is just a photographer's dream. The air is clear and crisp, the landscapes are beautiful, and the wildlife is very confiding and endearing. The other high Arctic big beast that we're after on a Svalbard cruise is the walrus. And they were sadly very heavily hunted back in the 17th, 18th centuries, and they're almost wiped out in Spitsbergen. But they've been protected now for quite a while. The numbers are increasing, and there's a few regular haul out spots, again mostly north and east, where you have a good chance of seeing walrus. It's mostly the males and immatures that spend the summer in Spitsbergen. The females go across to Franz Josef Land to pup. And on land, and you could well see them in the water as well. It's sort of interesting here that the colour of the walruses when they're in the water is much greyer than when they're on land. It's because they retract their blood to their core when they're in the water to stop themselves from chilling. So their skin goes very, very grey, very white, as we do if we get cold. And very lucky, maybe walruses and polar bear in the same shot, but sadly, you have this particular bear is probably quite hungry. Normally, the bears will feed on bearded seals, ringed seals, and those sorts of animals. Walruses will put up a pretty tough fight, and a bear can come off worse than a walrus on quite a few occasions. We actually watched this bear for quite a while. She didn't move at all. She just stood, watched the walruses. We eventually had to leave, and don't know how the story unfolded in the end. There are a few to look out for. Beluga whales to see quite frequently, especially in the fjords. They often hug the coast, and they're quite timid, but they're worth looking for all the deep water fjords. And even over the past few years, there's been regular sightings of blue whales. Again, as with the walrus, the whales are very, very heavily hunted in the 17th, 18th centuries, but the numbers are increasing. And we always try to, if possible, head out to the shelf edge, and that's where you tend to get your best chance of seeing some of the great whales, the blue whale, fin whale, humpback whale as well. On our longer 11-night cruise that we're going to be doing on the Ortelius in 2013, if the conditions allow, then we might even head out over the shelf edge along the ice edge, in the hope of possibly even seeing this incredibly rare creature, the almost mythical bowhead whale, one of the true high Arctic whales and one of the rarest cetaceans now on the planet. They were very common in Spitsbergen, but again almost wiped out sadly by the hunters. Over the past few years, the boat operators have found a population of bowheads that linger along the ice edge to the west of Spitsbergen, but it will depend on various factors whether we'll be able to get out there. But it's one idea, and you can't go to Svalbard without at least learning a little bit about the history of the place, because it was a jumping off spot for so many of the early polar explorers on their attempts to be the first to reach the North Pole. This is a plaque commemorating the airship flight of Amundsen and Ellsworth and Nobile, who were the first to cross the North Pole. And they flew from Spitsbergen, from the Alisund, across the North Pole to Alaska in 1926. But it's just such a beautiful place. The landscapes, the scenery, the wildlife, it really is just an amazing place to visit. And I'll wholeheartedly recommend it to anybody interested in this sort of environment. So I'll leave you with a sunset, except of course I can't leave you with a sunset in Svalbard, because in the middle of the summer the sun never sets. And this will be about as low as the sun will get during your entire cruise. And one of the great things is to go up on deck or go up into the bridge of the ship at midnight, and you watch the sun slowly going towards the horizon, and then it turns and goes back up again. So the main problem with your trip to Spitsbergen is actually finding the opportunity to sleep, because it's always something to see. The landscapes are so beautiful throughout the day, and can be a pretty tiring but a pretty spectacular place. So I will leave it there and pass over now to my colleague David Phillips. So if you've got any questions at all on Spitsbergen, then please let me know. There'll be a question and answer session at the end of our talks. But for now, thank you very much. And I will unshare my screen. Stop sharing.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much there, Paul. I'll just share my screen. Oops, bear with me. Oh, bear with me, sorry, I'm struggling to get my presentation. Okay, hopefully you can all see that okay.
Yeah, that's fine, David, great.
Lovely, thank you very much for confirming that, Sarah. Yes, thank you, Paul, and thank you to you all for tuning in this evening. My name's David Phillips, as Paul said, and I work in the office alongside Paul, and we work together on various polar trips. But one that I have been involved with now for the last 3 or 4 years since its inauguration. We started this tour in 2017, early 2017, actually. No, sorry, beg your pardon, late 2017. We ran our first Orcas, Humpbacks and Northern Lights tour. And this is a trip in which we charter a vessel, but not a vessel like the ones that you've been seeing in Paul's presentation. This is a very old wooden schooner. It's called the Rembrandt, and it was built in 1924. It's very comfortable on board, but it has the sort of feel of an older vessel, and this is something that I particularly like about it. When you sail on this vessel, you really feel as though you're entering into some more of a sort of an epic sort of voyage of polar exploration from a different era. As I say, very comfortable on board, but because it's got sails and we put those sails up, it gives a sort of lends it a different sort of feel. So where do we go on this trip? It's to northern Norway. And the reason that we go to North Norway in what is actually the winter time, we run this trip typically in January. It's usually December or January, and in the coming years we have January scheduled in for a 1-week trip to North Norway to see the orcas and humpbacks that mass in the fjords there. They're there to feed. There's a big numbers of herring come into the fjords to shelter during the winter period, and it's the orcas and the humpbacks that come to feed on those that we go to see. There's fishermen there as well, also looking for the herring, and in fact often the fishing boats that alert us to where the whales might be, and indeed it's around those fishing vessels often that we see the whales. But let me move on. So there's a picture there on this front screen of the Rembrandt there under full sail, and also showing you some Northern Lights in the top right picture, because that's another feature of this tour, which I'll speak on at greater length towards the end. So taking a leaf out of Paul's book, here's the map of where we go to. Very similar map. We head in the same way as when groups go up to Svalbard, they overnight in Oslo on the way up. We do the same. We fly from Heathrow up to Oslo, overnight in the airport hotel there, very comfortable hotel, and then fly the following morning up to Tromsø, the main town in the northern part of Norway, still deep within the Arctic Circle, about between 69 and 70 degrees of latitude, so it's well north of the Arctic Circle. And of course, during those winter months, the sun doesn't actually rise above the horizon, but there is a fairly decent length of twilights during which we're doing our observing of the sea for the whales. And then of course we have the long polar nights to look for the northern lights. We arrive, as I say, on the second day in the city of Tromsø, a very attractive town, or city, I should say. And in fact, its cathedral, its Arctic cathedral, is in this picture over on the south side of on the mainland of Norway, whereas the most part of the city is actually on a little island linked by a bridge, which you can just see on the left-hand side of this picture. But it's a very attractive town. It has not only that cathedral, but it has a nice shopping street. It has some interesting museums. There's a polar museum, which has a great deal of information about the polar exploration era. Of course, many of the famous polar explorers were Norwegian. Amundsen himself, of course, as Paul mentioned, was a Norwegian gentleman who set off or used Tromsø as a base for many of his polar expeditions. And in fact, we set off on our expedition in the ship from just within spitting distance of a statue of Amundsen himself. So we're sort of heading off from Amundsen's statue out into the fjords. As I say, it feels like you're on a real polar expedition. And this is a chart of a typical map of the course that we might follow. Now, clearly we're there to look for wildlife, so we're there to go where the wildlife is, and that varies from one year to another. The herrings go into different fjords, and over the years they varied from one fjord to another. But and of course the whales, dolphins, and seals follow those herrings. So we go in search of herring/whales, and this is the chart that we followed in 2019. As it happens, in fact, both in 2018 and in 2020, we followed a similar-ish route going east from Tromsø. So about 100 kilometers or so east of Tromsø is the island of Skorpa over here, and it's in a fjord, a big inlet here, which is where over the last few years we've had the greatest number of sightings. On this particular trip in 2019, we also went up over there north of the headland and into another narrow fjord over this side, where we had some interesting views of both white-sided and white-beaked dolphins as well. But you can see the sort of little squiggles on this map indicate areas where we've actually been, circling around, looking at whales, observing whales at the time. A gentleman who was on one of the trips that I led, in fact, I think it was on 21 prior to this, referred to this as being typical foraging behavior. You can see where we're from the map, where we're looking for the animals. So the boat itself is very comfortable inside, very warm inside. Obviously out on deck it's chilly, and you need to be extremely well wrapped up. But when you're inside, it's very warm and it's very comfortable. The cabins are quite small, but they all have ensuite facilities. And then there's a quite large area of deck space inside for people to eat, and there's a little bar and bookshelves full of interesting books. It's quite a nice convivial sort of indoor space to be able to enjoy. And during the evenings or late afternoons, because as I say, the days are short, so by the afternoon we try to give talks to amuse everybody and to entertain and encourage people to show, encourage their interests in the wildlife of the area. So here is one of our expedition staff, Everett Mull, giving a talk about the dolphins and other cetaceans of the area. He's a whale specialist, researcher specialising in the movements of whales up in North Norway, and will be joining our trip again in January this next year. But you can see the area here. This is where we eat, but it's also where we are able to give these lectures. But during the daytime, the short daylight hours, we're out on deck in amongst marvellous scenery, beautiful snowy landscapes, and glacially carved mountainsides, bitterly cold waters, of course. But whilst we're out there, we're looking for both the humpbacks and orcas. This is a nice view here of an orca coming in fairly close to the boat. And all the trips that we've run so far been very successful in seeing both the humpbacks and orcas during the trips. And as I say, a few other cetaceans, dolphin species as well. The Rembrandt has a couple of zodiacs on board. So if the weather conditions are suitable, we get the zodiacs into the water, and that allows clients a chance to get in closer to the whales. Obviously, the boat itself doesn't move very fast, but the zodiacs can move a little bit more quickly. And it just gives a different sort of perspective on the water, being able to get down closer to the water level and be able to view, in this, like in this lower photograph, a couple of humpback whales close to the shore. This is one of the groups there on one of the zodiacs, and it's you can see that they're well togged up with hats and gloves and lots of layers as well. This is so just we cruise around the bays. You can see the water's fairly calm, and typically that is the case in amongst the fjords there. We're well inside the sort of the islands and breakwaters to be able to be in sort of fairly calm conditions. Ordinarily, we don't often go out into water which is more choppy. Sometimes that's necessary just to get around to a further bay, but normally speaking, it's fairly calm. But we get good views of the orcas in that sort of still water, and humpbacks there as well. Some humpback behaviour there, tail flukes out of the water, and spy hopping behaviour we're able to see during this time. It's fantastic. And we're able to also put the sails up if the conditions are suitable. The crew were very keen to allow us the opportunity to put the sails up, obviously under their instruction. They know what they're doing. But it gives us some exercise, gets us warm out there on deck, and it's a bit of fun as well. So there we are, hoisting the sails on the boat there on the ship. And during the evenings, this obviously isn't an evening, but during the evenings we moor up at one of the islands invariably, or one of the villages on the mainland, and we can go out and get out and go for a bit of a walk here. The group are in snowshoes, walking across one of the islands there through the little sort of birch forests there. In addition to the mammal life, the seals and whales and dolphins, there's some bird life to see as well. Probably the main interest, or certainly the main interest of an avian nature, are the white-tailed eagles, of which there is a very healthy population in North Norway. In fact, it is from North Norway that nearly all of the eagles that have been relocated to the UK, to Mull, and established breeding birds up in Scotland, and then further down, of course, now in other places down in southern England even. They're all birds that have come from the Norwegian population, and you see many of them as you sail around the fjords there. You see during the sort of clear daylight hours, you're seeing them all the time, flying around, often catching fish from the water surface. In addition to the birds, also we often see other mammals such as moose along the shoreline here. Sometimes we see otter, harbour seals as well, harbour porpoise in the water. As I said, white-sided and white-beaked dolphins. So there's a good number of other mammal species that we might well see. Reindeer a possibility as well. But as I say, we moor up in the evenings at often either a little village or at a jetty there on one of the mainlands. So we're able to get off the boat, and that's actually really good because it gives you the opportunity to stretch your legs, go on land, and also, of course, get onto a stable platform for the clear. If you have a nice clear evening, and you may, if we're lucky, see northern lights. Well, if it's clear, when you're that far north, you're very, very likely to see northern lights. Because you're well within the sort of Arctic regions and under what we term the auroral oval. So I'm going to talk now about the northern lights and what causes them, because I think it's good to understand a little bit about them as to give you an idea of why it is you have to go far north to see them. They're a result of particles that are emitted from the sun. There's a phenomenon known as the solar wind, which essentially is just a stream of charged particles that are emitted from the sun at an incredible speed, typically to 400 to 600 kilometers per second. Charged particles stream out from the sun, cross space, and take about 3 to 4 days to reach the Earth. And they don't actually reach the Earth's surface because the Earth is protected by a magnetic field, the magnetosphere of the Earth, which you can see here looking like a magnet, because that's exactly what it is. And that protects the Earth, but it deflects those particles around the sides of the Earth's magnetic field and funnels them down into the northern polar regions. And the sun goes through a period of activity, a cyclical period, and essentially some points in its cycle it's producing a lot of this solar wind, other times it's producing less solar wind or less speedy solar wind, and it's all dependent upon the sun's cycle, the solar cycle. Now at the moment we are somewhere between a solar minimum and a solar maximum. Typically this is dictated or demonstrated on the solar surface by sunspots. When there's a solar minimum, you see very few sunspots on the sun, as we did in 2018 and 2019. But as the solar activity builds, you get more and more sunspots appearing on the surface of the sun. And by about 2024, 2025, we'll reach the next solar maximum, at which point you have the sun peppered with these sunspots. And that's, as I say, it's all to do with the activity of the sun. It's all to do with the magnetic field and magnetic activity on the sun itself. This chart here shows the number of sunspots and how it varies over time. The little chart along the very bottom there shows just how regular this cycle is. But zooming in on it, looking over the last decade, you can see there that we're now just starting to pick up again in solar activity. This is the sun today, so actually there's not a lot of solar activity, but there are a couple of sunspots just about visible on the sun today. So it is just starting to pick up again. And once you get that solar activity increasing, it means that you have more solar wind being emitted from the solar surface, and more chance, I should say, of the sort of big coronal mass ejections that occur on the sun. And these are the events that really give rise to dramatic solar storms, and hence the sort of geomagnetic interference that we get, which causes the aurora. So when you get that solar storms on the sun, we get aurora here on the Earth in a greater to a greater extent. So those charged particles get zoomed into, get funneled in, if you like, into the polar regions of the Earth. And you can see there the sort of circle of that high latitude which gets affected by them. As the particles come in, they charge up the particles in the Earth's atmosphere, the molecules in the Earth's atmosphere, which then discharge light in the form of green, of very specific colors, greens for oxygen, and sometimes you get some magenta type light from nitrogen, and you get reds from oxygen as well. So the atoms that are within, the molecules that are within the Earth's atmosphere get charged up, release that activity, release the energy in the form of light, and that's what your aurora is. So like I say, it basically happens around the polar regions, and this is the region you need to be in if you want to see the aurora. So you can see that donut of shape, which basically covers places like Iceland, North Norway, Alaska, parts of Yukon and northern Canada lie under the aurora oval. So these are the places to go for northern lights. So here we are on this vessel that will just come off the vessel, the Rembrandt. On our trip in 2019, we called in at one of the little harbour villages there, and there was an auroral activity. It was just starting to build, so we got everybody out of the boat to come and have a look, so that, away from the lights of the boat, although we could turn the lights on the boat off. It was good to get away from that, and we could watch the developing auroral arc as it started to appear there in the northern east of the sky. The first sort of event that you start to see with an aurora typically is this sort of quiet sort of arc across the northern sky, and then you start to get magnificent sort of filaments and rays and swaying arcs and dancing lights that come later. This is a shot I just thought I'd put in. It's actually one that I took in Tromsø. So this is in amongst the city lights itself. We had a tremendous view of aurora one evening, one of the best displays I'd ever seen, and it was such a shame that we happened to be in the town at the time. And so it wasn't a place we could get away from the strict city lights, but nonetheless, it was a most dramatic of displays. And a lot of these displays have also occurred during solar minimum too. So when I say that the sun is getting more active, and it is, and there's more chance of auroral activity over the coming years, you do get quite decent auroral activity during the solar minima. So you should never rule out periods when the sun is quiet, because there are other reasons why you get some good aurora during those periods as well. But this is a sort of typical shot that you get of aurora when it's really being very dramatic, very energetic display right across the sky. You get these sort of waving curtains of light This is just a shot I thought I'd throw in. It's actually one I took in Iceland back in September of this year when I was up there, demonstrating again that you don't necessarily need to have the solar maximum to get a great view of aurora. And we had a cracking display that particular evening. And also want to mention that obviously people often comment on the colours that you see in aurora and how it perhaps isn't as vividly green as a lot of photographs show. And that's true to an extent. Our eyes aren't adapted to picking up colour in low lighting conditions. But you do see movement and you do see structures that you can't see so well or you can't image well. So actually, I think in many respects, seeing an aurora is better than looking at photographs or videos of them. And this particular picture I wanted to put in because it was constructed by an astro artist called David Hardy, who joined me on a trip quite a few years ago now in Iceland. And he wanted to depict how he saw the aurora of an evening. This is an artwork, not a photograph. And this was how he saw it. And actually a picture taken by a client on the same evening, very, very same field, almost the same landscape in the foreground, showing the sort of green of the light, but not showing anything like the sort of level of structure. And of course, the moon is completely burnt out, whereas in David's image, you can see it was just a fine crescent there. So many times I think that viewing an aurora is better than trying to go to great pains to photograph them. But there we are. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to close there on aurora. I think they're a great phenomenon, well worth trying to see one time in your life if you can. And going to North Norway is a great place to see them. And so I will close there and hand over to Sarah. If I just stop call, if I close now.
Thank you very much, David and Paul. Both fantastic talks there. Folks, we'll be heading to a short break now, just under 10 minutes. So you've got time to pop to the toilet and get yourselves a top-up of tea, wine or beer. And we'll be back at 8:25 p.m. where we'll be going to Antarctica. See you shortly. Okay, folks, welcome back. And I'm now going to hand over to Tim, who's taking us to Antarctica. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Right, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can't see your screen yet.
Hang on.
You just need to click the green share screen button at the bottom. There we go. It's loading.
Looking like it, isn't it?
Yep. There. Oh,
well done.
perfect. Thanks, Tim.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Right, so I'm going to talk about the Naturetrek trips to the Falkland Islands. And we always do these three together because if you just look at a map of that's South America in top right. The Falkland Islands are that pair of islands that you can see just to the east of South America, and they're about 400 miles from the coast. And then over on the right of the screen, that little crescent-shaped island is South Georgia. And that is 1,300 miles from the coast. And then you've got to come southwestwards to reach Antarctica. So that's the peninsula of the Antarctic there. And there are no aircraft airports or anything like that for landing on South Georgia. So the only way to get there is by ship, and that takes a long time. So the trips are typically 3 weeks long. And we start off from Ushuaia in southern Argentina, which is the most southerly city on the planet, right down the southern tip near Tierra del Fuego. And then you go to the Antarctic in their summer, and then move up to the Arctic for their summer. And they bounce between the two. So the Ortelius is the one that we usually use, which is perfectly plus the wildlife. And as soon as you set off into the Beagle Channel to get out of Ushuaia, you start to see birds, which is called the white-chinned petrel. I always think it's rather perversely called the white-chinned petrel because you would only see its white chin if you had it in the hand. It's about the size of a postage stamp underneath the bill there, but that's why it's been called white-chinned petrel. But it's a big, spectacular black petrel that's bigger than a fulmar, and you get the smaller petrels too. It's difficult to look at the sea without seeing Wilson's petrels down there. Just every time you glance out at the sea, you will see Wilson's petrels. And also, in the bit between the Falklands and South America, the great shearwaters are very, very common. I mean, they breed in their thousands around the Falklands and on the islands nearby. So it's one of the birds that you'll be expecting to see large numbers of, as well as sooty shearwaters. And both of these birds do a reverse migration. So they come north for their winter, which encompasses Britain. So if you're in the right place at the right time and very lucky, you can see these birds off Britain. And indeed, I've actually seen Manx shearwaters down off the Falklands as well. So that's our breeding Manx shearwaters going the other way. So it really is a great place for seabirds. And albatrosses too. We've heard a lot about albatrosses getting very rare, but again, it's difficult to look at the sea without seeing a black-browed albatross. They just seem to be absolutely everywhere down there. Anyway, after it's 400 miles, and when we've sailed that distance, usually on the morning, we arrive in the Falklands. And the first thing we want to do is get out and stretch our legs. But unfortunately, if you look, you'll see that the beach is already busy. Terrible luck there. We wanted to get the place to ourselves, except when you get down to the beach, of course, it's not humans. It's full of penguins. In this case, Gen 2 penguins. There's also good colonies of, this is southern rockhopper penguin, one of the yellow-crested penguins there. And they go out and hunt together because it's safety in numbers. If one of the predators, an orca or a leopard seal, comes after them, if they're in a big group, it's only going to catch one of them, so it's less chances of being caught. So that's why they all come to do everything in unison, and they have to go out to catch fish to come back and feed their youngsters. And it's like chariots of fire, this, isn't it? As they all, when they reach the shore, they end up all clambering together and then running around until they reach their chicks, and that's where they feed the youngsters there. Also on the Falklands, there's big numbers of black-browed albatrosses. They always nest in association with little streams because they build big eye of mud, and they like to be able to just sort of reach over and grab a beakful and construct this. And they use the same nest year after year with a little bit of house repairs. And that's one of the much used egg cup shaped nests with a baby black-browed albatross in it that's just learning to grow up, because they're even bigger than a golden eagle, huge wingspan. The steamer duck that is on the Falkland Islands has recently been split. It's an endemic. It's the flightless steamer duck. Its wings look quite long there, airborne, so they do a lot of paddle steaming about on the surface there. We usually visit a couple of the Falkland Islands, and this is a place called Carcass Island, which has a slightly different suite of birds. There's good numbers of Magellanic penguins there. They nest in burrows under the ground. That's a pair of adults. They usually nest for life, and a fluffy youngster with them. And the oddly named tussock bird as well. This is one of the Syncloides, which means dipper-like, and this is another endemic to the Falkland Islands. It's called tussock bird because its favourite habitat is the tussock grass, which are these enormous great tussocks of grass that's now actually very, very rare. But on Carcass Island, and you can see there's a Magellanic penguin next to it. So, yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Your connection's breaking up a little bit for us here, so we're sometimes missing parts of what you're saying. What I'm going to do is just turn your webcam off and see if that improves the connection for people, so that the internet isn't having to worry about sending a picture for every one of you. Okay, just in case you wonder why your image suddenly disappears.
Yeah, that's fine, which is about 15 inches high, so you can see that those tussocks are about 6 feet tall there. And also, this is the endemic Cobb's wren. Wren occurs, and again, the tussock grass is one of the favoured habitat. Other interesting things is the black-throated finch as well, of the songbirds that you're likely to see on the Falkland Islands. Then, when we've spent a bit of time on the Falkland Islands, we usually visit Port Stanley as well. It's time to set to sea again, because we've got a long way to travel before we cover the next 900 miles before we reach South Georgia. But again, it's a really productive, interesting thing to see, as well as all the things I've already mentioned, the great shearwaters. This is a black-bellied storm petrel, and much rarer, that's the grey-backed storm petrel as well, but we usually see both of those. That's a slender-billed prion. This is the commonest prion in this area. The warmer area of sea, called rather similarly the northern royal albatross and the southern royal albatross. The northern royal albatross has huge, great, long black wings, and the southern one has much more white on the wings, much more like a wandering albatross, but very, very big birds. And they breed around New Zealand, but they wander all over the Southern Ocean. Pass, which is a albatross. That's the grey-headed albatross, that I took just as we were passing there. And this is also an area that's really good for whales. We see lots of humpback whales and fin whales and often sei whales, but this one is showing the characteristic double blow of one of the right whales, and this is indeed a southern right whale, which is quite a rare whale, but we saw lots of these on the first trip that we did. And other rare cetaceans that not many people get a chance to see. This is the southern bottlenose whale as well, that I photographed in this area of water. And then you pass into what we call the Antarctic front, which is the area of cold water, and the whole atmosphere changes. You start to see icebergs in the colder water. There's definitely a chill in the wet air, and the birds change as well. You start to see things like snow petrels, which is the most southerly breeding bird on the planet. It breeze right down towards the South Pole on rock formations there, and then flies all the way to get to the Southern Oceans to feed there. Much commoner is the pintado petrel, or the painted petrel. And then we do arrive at South Georgia itself. That was our first view of as we arrived at South Georgia, and what a treat was waiting for us there as well. Just absolutely enormous numbers. I mean, getting on for 500,000 king penguins. And if you look, even in the far distance beyond that line of tussock grass, it's all wall-to-wall king penguins. That brown area is actually the youngsters in a creche there. That's a close-up of the actual flocks that you get in there. It was like a Where's Wally book, doesn't it? When you look at them like that. But this is, it's like Woodstock Festival for penguins. They're just absolutely breathtaking, it is. And this is also the most, where you get the most southerly songbird on the planet. This is the South Georgia pipit, the only songbird in the whole of the true Antarctic region, and this is the only place on the planet that it occurs in South Georgia. I actually saw the island where I filmed this on the rerun of Frozen Planet the other night, David Attenborough's BBC programme. This is a place called Pryan Island, where there's wandering albatross that breed there. This is a couple of them. That one's just arrived back, and they're doing the greeting and clattering that they do. This has got the largest wingspan of any bird on the planet, absolutely enormous. And when you see them on the water next to things like black-browed albatrosses, they look about 4 times the size. They really are huge, huge birds. Yeah, we also visit some of the old whaling communities, which are thankfully no longer in operation. But you'll see the old whaling boats with the harpoons at the front, just rusting away, and sadly, lots of the old whaling bones. But they're good places for bird watching around here. They've just all been abandoned now. But this is the South Georgia pintail, which is an endemic subspecies of the South American yellow-billed pintail. This is yet a different king penguin colony. This is called at a place called St Andrews Bay, which I liked even more than the previous one at Salisbury Plain, as they call it. This one you can get onto the rise and just look down, and it's just, I mean, it really is just amazing there. And the penguins are just indifferent to you. They treat you as if you were just penguins yourself there. This is a young one that's they call them busbies for obvious reasons. It look like a guardsman's helmet, except they're a fluffy brown colour, and they wait on the shore, often in big creches, for the parents to come back with a crop full of food for them. And they recognize their youngster by the voice, by its voice, and yet to our ears the voices all sound the same. But they've shown that parent birds can recognize recordings of their own chicks amongst dozens of others, or hundreds of others, in fact, not thousands there. This is also a great place to see another species of albatross. This is the light-mantled sooty albatross, common, but you know, we saw them frequently enough there. Look at those wonderful crescents around the dark face, absolute beauties. Now, this they have special rules that you're not supposed to hassle the penguins. You're not supposed to approach within 6 feet. But I'd just arrived on the beach, and I was getting my camera equipment and my rucksack sorted out. And this penguin wandered over and just leaned forward and started looking at me. So I thought, well, it's approached me. I'm not approaching it. So I got my camera out and took some pictures of it. And somebody else had the wherewithal to take the photograph of me about to have the photograph. So there's the king penguin that had approached me there. So also on South Georgia, there's good numbers of macaroni penguins, another one of the yellow-crested penguins, except they've got a sad mouth. You can see it's like one of those Pierrot clowns that with the downturned mouth at the end. This is actually the most abundant species of penguin on the planet, but and about a third of the population occurs on South Georgia, but they occur all over in smaller colonies, so you don't get the huge great numbers like you do of the king penguins. That's a close-up of the macaroni penguin. This was taken from a Zodiac, just with a long lens as they were sitting on the rocks. I wasn't hassling it, so 420 millimeters gets you much closer without having to disturb them. And look at those bright yellow feathers on the head. It's just amazing on a predominantly black and white bird. Then it's time to leave South Georgia and head down across to Antarctica itself. Sometimes we, after 3 days, after a couple of days, we even visit Elephant Island, which is where Shackleton was stranded before he made his rescue attempt to get back to South Georgia and seek help. But again, the ubiquitous black-browed albatross is there. You tend, in the colder waters, the albatrosses tend to disappear. So, but there's still plenty of the other the birds around. You can see there, that's a typical seascape there. All the little tiny ones are probably Wilson's petrels, and that's a blue whale as well. We've seen blue whale on all the trips that we've done down there. So you know, huge, great things and fantastic to see. But they are much rarer than the other whales. We usually see, I mean, maybe even hundreds of fin whales and humpback whales, and smaller numbers of sei whales and minke whales, but and usually a handful of blue whales there. The birds again change as you get a bit in the colder areas. This is a southern fulmar, actually quite closely related to the northern fulmar, but they occupy completely different hemispheres and are separated by thousands of miles of sea, so not even close to each other there. And there are 3 species of diving petrel that we see, all fiendishly difficult to tell apart, but this one with the semi-collar there is the South Georgia diving petrel, which only breeds on South Georgia, another endemic species. There's 2 more species of prions down here in the colder water. All prions look very, very similar, but the one on the left is a fairy prion with a plain face and a small bill and a lot of black on its tail. And the one on the right is the Antarctic prion, which is the really common one. It's quite difficult to pick out fairy prions because they're outnumbered by over 1,000 to 1 of the Antarctic prions, but I luckily managed to get them both in the same shot here. That one isn't a prion. That one with a little white tip to its tail is a blue petrel. It's actually prion. And this is the Antarctic petrel. And before I went, we were warned that they're in very, very small numbers, and so make sure everybody gets onto them if you see one. So as we sailed in the Southern Ocean, I screamed out when I saw my first Antarctic petrel, and then everybody got onto it. And then a couple of seconds later, somebody else said, "Well, what's that there?" "Oh, it's another one." And another one. And eventually we found that, but unless you happen to find the population sitting on the icebergs, you just don't get to see them. But that iceberg there, all that big black stain on the top, are all Antarctic petrels, which explains why it's so difficult to see them at sea, because they're all sitting around on the icebergs there. The larger black dots just down to the right are Adelie penguins as well. This is the Antarctic terns. This is Arctic terns in the Antarctic. So our Arctic terns that breed on the Farne Islands and around Britain migrate south to the Antarctic for the winter, but you very rarely see photographs of them. So that's a whole group of Arctic terns in the Antarctic there. And that's some penguins on an iceberg. I'm going to have to hurry because I realise I'm a little bit behind time. This is a chin strap penguin down in Antarctica. You get different species of penguin when you get this far south. This is the realm of the chinstrap penguin. There's one doing a Tom Daly off an iceberg into the water there. And this is a porpoising a Daly penguin right down by the southern ice cap. They often wander around in the little pairs there, very strong pair bonds. And there's a group of them in front of an iceberg. And this is a Weddell seal. We usually see Weddell seals, crab-eater seals, and leopard seals. Weddell seals and crab-eaters usually feed on krill and fish, but this is the moment that an Adelie penguin realizes that the eating leopard seal, and that's the genuine look of horror on its face as it spotted it there. And also they're not safe from orcas either, because a lot of orcas will patrol the ice edge looking for penguins there. This is a Gen 2 penguin, right down about as far as we could go with the ice down in Antarctica there. And there's a sunset to finish off with. You do actually get sunsets there because we're not actually as equivalent as far south as Svalbard is to the north, but and that's a dramatic sunset there. And that's it. Thank you very much indeed. And I'll hand back to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Tim. Apologies, folks, if any of you weren't able to decipher everything Tim was saying, but I think we caught most of it. There was a couple of disruptions with the connection there. But I'm now going to hand you over to Kevin Elsby, who is taking us to the Falkland Islands. Over to you, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. My name's Kevin Elsby, and I've been a leader for Naturetrek for about 19 years now. So a special hello to those of you watching who I've met before on some of my trips. I'm going to talk about a land-based trip to the Falkland Islands over the next 20 minutes or so. The Falklands are an archipelago of about 700 islands, but the main ones are East and West Falkland. Stanley is the capital, and that's located in East Falkland, and I'll move my mouse across to show you where that is. That's over on the right-hand side. Now, we arrive from the UK. We fly from RAF Bryce Norton on an RAF flight, but it's a commercial type aircraft. You wouldn't know the difference inside whether you were flying RAF or flying Virgin or British Airways. It's a proper civilian aircraft otherwise. We have a stop for refueling en route, and it's about a 17-hour flight in total to get to the Falklands. So this trip is a multi-centre trip which visits several of the islands in the archipelago of the Falklands, which gives us a thorough exploration of some of the wildlife to be found here. So I'm just going to show you on the map the islands that we visit. First of all, we land here at the RAF base at Mount Pleasant. And further to the east is Stanley itself, the capital of the Falklands. And during the course of the trip, we'll be visiting Carcass Island in the far northwest, Pebble Island right in the middle at the far north, Bleaker Island to the south, and the southernmost island that we'll visit will be Sea Lion Island, right on the south of the archipelago. Now, just to orientate you a little bit, Stanley is at about 51 degrees south in the southern hemisphere, which is about the same latitude as Leeds is in the northern hemisphere in the UK. And the weather is reasonably similar. It's probably a little bit cooler in the Falklands than you would expect in the UK in the summer, because of course we'll be visiting the Falklands in the Falklands summer, which is our winter. They do get snow, but not usually very much, and it doesn't last very long. But we'll be visiting during the peak time for the breeding, both of birds and also the mammals, but particularly the birds. And I feel that the Falklands have a lot in common with the Galapagos. Now, why might I say that? Well, first of all, obviously, they're both archipelago, but really, the real thing for me is that they both have lots of abundant species of wildlife, which is incredibly tame and approachable. And if you're into your wildlife photography, then it really is a trip to the Falklands gives you fantastic opportunities for getting those wildlife shots. Now, here is a view of Stanley. This is the seafront at Stanley, showing the cathedral in the background, that tall red building. And visiting the Falklands, you'll be following in some famous footsteps, such as Charles Darwin, James Clark Ross, and Ernest Shackleton. These have all spent time here in the past. And obviously, in addition to that, there are opportunities to visit some of the historic sites of the conflict in 1982. So here's a few images of Stanley itself, and you can see top left there, you've got the typical UK.
Kevin, sorry to interrupt, but the images aren't changing. We're still seeing just the map of the Falklands at the moment.
Thank you, Paul. Let me see why that is happening. Just tell me if you're getting this now, Paul.
Well, just the map at the moment, yeah. Kevin.
Okay. Anything changing? You got it?
Yeah, it's changing now, Kevin.
Sorry about that, folks. Technology is wonderful when it works. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing a split screen with 4 images, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Right, sorry about that. So top left, you've got the typical red pillar box of a British phone box next to a post box, and this is actually the main post office in Stanley. To the right, you've got the historic cathedral, and in front of it, you can see that arch, hopefully, which is a whalebone arch. Bottom left is the governor's residence in Stanley, and to the right, bottom right, is the Globe Tavern, which is a famous pub in Stanley and serves fantastic fish and chips. But this is how we'll be getting around. You fly around the Falkland Islands. There aren't many roads at all outside of Stanley, so the only or the best way to get around, and this is what we would be using, is to be flying in these small Britain-Norman aeroplanes run by FIGAS. If you have a look at the tail of this aeroplane, the letters FIGAS, that stands for Falkland Islands Government Air Service. And the islanders in the Falklands use them almost like taxis. And Stanley is the largest settlement in the archipelago with a population of about 3,000. But the next most populous settlement in all of the Falklands is a place called Port Howard. And the last time I was there, it had a population of 32. So that gives you an idea about how sparsely populated these islands are. And so we'll be getting around using these aircraft. And then once we're on base on the particular islands, we'll be driving around in 4-wheel drive vehicles, because as I say, roads are very few and far apart in the Falklands. So when you're using these aeroplanes, you do get a really good opportunity of seeing the landscape from the air as you're flying along from island to island. As I say, it's a multi-center trip, and this is a view typical from your, almost from your lodge, really. This is the one from in Carcass Island, showing this beautiful coastline and completely deserted beaches. And indeed, outside of Stanley, it is pretty well deserted. Wonderful opportunities with a wonderful feeling of space and fresh air wherever you go. And of course, the locals are extremely welcoming and very, very friendly. Here's a view of the typical lodge that we'll be staying in. This is the one on Darwin, and all have fantastic home cooking, and we are really made to feel very welcome by the locals. And the wildlife is pretty well on your doorstep in all of the lodges that we stay at. And so I'm just going to show you some of the species that we're more or less guaranteed to see. And I'll start here. On the top row, we've got a couple of blue-eyed shags or blue-eyed cormorants or imperial shags. The taxonomists love confusing the average bird watcher with their names. But if you look at the bird top right, hopefully you'll make out that blue eye ring that gives these birds their name. And the one on the top left is just coming in, landing with nesting material on the cliff edge where these birds prefer to nest, because they can just jump off the cliff and they're airborne pretty well straight away. So if you look bottom left, this is a colony of the blue-eyed shag nesting on the cliff edge in great numbers, usually in amongst some penguins as well. And bottom right, you can see the other species of cormorant to be found on the Falklands, which is known as the rock shag. It's a bit smaller, slightly different plumage, and obviously doesn't have that red eye or eye ring that the blue-eyed shag has. Now, one of the other birds to find on the coast here, all around the Falklands, they breed inland as well, are the skuas. And this is the brown skua. And there's a pair here that have found a penguin egg, and they are feeding off the penguin egg. And as many of you know, I'm sure, skuas are quite ferocious birds. They will chase down adult birds at sea, but also will hang around penguin colonies, feeding on anything they can get hold of, basically, whether it's an egg, a young chick, or even adult penguins from time to time. One of the trips that we'll do from Carcass Island is to take a short boat trip across to another island called West Point. And here we aim to see a colony of black-browed albatrosses. Mixed in with them are some breeding rockhopper penguins. And this is a tea room on West Point Island that we usually call in at and have a nice cup of tea after we've seen the penguins and the albatrosses, and they serve fantastic homemade cakes in here as well. So we'll land on the island, and then it's a gentle walk of about half a mile, perhaps a little bit further, over the top of this hill, and we'll come to the other side of the island to see these wonderful seabirds nesting on the exposed rock here, as you can make out. These are mainly black-browed albatrosses, but also scattered amongst them, as I say, are numerous rockhopper penguins, southern rockhopper penguins. And this, as Tim's shown in his talk, this is the sort of view you would hope to see at the time that we'll be there. This is the middle of the breeding season. A lot of the chicks will have hatched, hopefully, and be at this sort of stage sitting on their nest with a parent bird in this case. And the nests always remind me of mini volcanoes, mud mini volcanoes. But when you see them in flight, they really are magnificent birds. They actually belong to a group of albatrosses called mollymawks, which are known as the small albatrosses, but nonetheless, these birds still have a wingspan of between 6 and 8 feet. About 85% of the world population of black-browed albatrosses breeds on the Falkland Islands, so we've got every chance of seeing them. I'll just point out a few other birds we're likely to see. Top left, we've got a blackish oyster catcher sitting on the nest. And you may just make out extreme top left is its mate just keeping a watchful eye. And the other bird in the top on the right is another oyster catcher. That's the Magellanic oyster catcher, named after the explorer Ferdinand Magellan. Bottom left, we've got a duck called the crested duck, and these are really common throughout the islands, both on the coast, but also on many of the inland lakes. And bottom right, we've got a pair of dolphin gulls, a very attractive gull, again, fairly common throughout the islands. Now, Tim showed a picture of these birds. This is the Falkland steamer duck. They are different sexually. This is the male on the left with the white head. It's a little bit larger, I should say, than the female on the right. And these are absolutely everywhere, and we should certainly see these, often with a number of ducklings at the time of our visit. That'll be the peak time for seeing the ducklings. And as Tim mentioned, these are flightless. There is a little bit controversy amongst the taxonomists, I should say, in terms of species, what species we're talking about on the Falklands. But generally, these are now known as the Falkland steamer duck, or the Falkland steamer duck. It can be quite confusing because they keep changing their names. Now, other species of wildfowl we can find there. On the top row, you've got two pictures of kelp geese. The male is on the right, the pure white bird with the orange legs, and the female is on the left, again with yellow legs, but a completely different body plumage. And it's a real extreme example of what is known as sexual dimorphism, where the male and the female differ so much. And on the bottom row, you've got a pair of upland geese with, again, the male bird is the paler bird on the right and the female is on the left. And both of these species are found throughout the islands. In fact, the bottom two I photographed from the doorstep of the lodge at Darwin where we were staying. They were just feeding on the short grass there. Moving on to a few smaller land birds. This is one of the commonest of the smaller land birds to see here. This is the Austral thrush, or the Falklands thrush. It's about the size of a blackbird. and it's reasonably common, particularly where people have planted vegetation, bushes or trees, because there aren't any really tall trees around the Falklands at all nowadays. The tallest you will find are actually the tussock, which isn't a tree at all, but that's the Falklands thrush tends to be around the small settlements that are on the island. And another selection of small birds, the bird in the top left here, this is a black-chinned siskin, which is reasonably common, and another species of wren on the top right, the grass wren. Bottom left is a lovely bird about the size of a starling, but it's actually called the long-tailed meadowlark. The nickname for it, though, is the military starling, and it's fairly obvious to identify that with this lovely sort of beautiful bright red breast that it has. And the bird on the right is one that Tim showed earlier. This is the tussock bird, or the blackish Synclodes. And these birds will actually come up to you if you're standing on the shoreline. They have a habit of turning over the seaweed to look for insects, and they'll come and stand on your boots and flick out the seaweed that you're standing on. They're incredibly tame, so easy to get great photographs on a trip to the Falklands. Here's another lodge that we'll be staying at. This is the lodge on Sea Lion Island, and it's a really comfortable lodge here, again with great food, great hospitality, and just outside of there you have this colony of Gen 2 penguins. That's the lodge in the background, so you really don't have to walk too far at all to get engaged with the wildlife on site. And here's a pair of birds. They're two individuals, I should say. These are probably walking to the sea after incubation or rearing their chicks. They've basically just left the nest and they're walking out to the sea to feed again or get food for their chicks. And the way you can tell that is just by how dirty the breast feathers are, particularly on the bird on the right. When you see penguins with pure white breasts, it usually means they've just come out of the sea. So these birds are walking out into the sea to find food. And here's a close-up of one of the Gen 2s in that colony. And as Tim said, you don't disturb these birds. You don't need to, because you can get to a point where if you've got a decent lens, you can get photographs like this without having to disturb the birds. More birds to find include things like the black-crowned night heron. This is another common bird around the Stanley area. That's the bird on the top left. And perhaps a surprising bird to find there is a short-eared owl. But there are a good population of short-eared owls. That's the bird on the top right in the Falkland Islands. And bottom left, this is another small land bird. This is the Corondera pipit, otherwise known as the Falklands pipit. And the bird on the right, as Tim mentioned, this is the white brindle finch. This is a male, and they're about the size of a goldfinch, that sort of size, and they're reasonably common, feeding on seeds around the shoreline particularly. Here's a view of Pebble Island. This is one of the islands that we'll visit, and it's one of my favorite of all the islands that we go to. And this is the inside of the lodge that we'll be staying at Pebble Island. Very comfortable, very welcoming, excellent food again. And some birds of prey. Well, the bird on the top left is a variable hawk, or red-backed hawk is its other name. This bird's just coming into land. There's a good population of them. You have to look hard for them, but they're reasonably common. And the bird top right is a turkey vulture. And just like the vultures elsewhere in the world, they do their job in terms of cleaning up when birds die, feeding on carcasses and so on. And the bottom two birds are the same species. That's the striated caracara, which is known locally as a Johnny Rook. And the bird on the left, the individual on the left there, is actually trying to open a penguin egg. And you get the idea that penguins are not particularly careful sometimes and leave their eggs unattended for birds like skuas, or in this case, the caracaras. One other word about the caracaras is not to leave anything lying around, whether it's a pen or your mobile phone or a notebook, because these birds will quite happily make off with it. So you really need to make sure you've got everything under lock and key before you settle down to do any bird watching or photography. Well, there are 5 species of penguins which nest regularly on the Falklands. I mentioned this one before. This is the southern rockhopper penguin. These are the ones that nest often amongst the black-browed albatross rookeries, colonies. Penguins are rookeries. And here's another selection of images that you can easily get on the Falkland Islands. The birds on the top left are actually living up to their name. The extreme right-hand one here, if I can move my mouse, that's actually in midair. You can see its feet are off the ground there. They're very colourful, very noisy colonies, rookeries these penguins have, but they have this gorgeous red eye that the adults, and they really are very endearing to watch. That cannot be said about this bird. This is the southern giant petrel. This is one of the vultures of the sea, really, and they are really ferocious birds. They will feed on anything living that they can get their beaks into, whether that's a young penguin or even an adult penguin, as well as feeding on dead material that they can find on the sea. But they are not averse to getting into penguin rookeries and singling out weak and vulnerable individuals, whether they're adults or youngsters, and killing them. So there's plenty of those to be found around the coast of the Falklands, and a reasonably I think there's about 200 or 300 pairs breed there. And with certainly every chance that we will come across those on our trip. Here's another species of penguin. This is the Magellanic penguin, another bird that's named after the Portuguese explorer. This is a group coming ashore, similar to the photo that Tim showed us earlier in his talk. And as Tim said, these birds, they're the only penguin on the Falklands that breed underground. So that the bird in the bottom right is standing by its burrow, and they dig those burrows out. It's soft peat, basically, and they create their own nesting chambers. And the bottom left photograph shows an adult on the left with a well-grown chick on just to its side. And top right, you can see a group of both adults and unfledged birds standing on the shoreline. And these are reasonably easy to see in many places around the Falkland Islands. But I suppose one of the most popular of the penguin species to see there is the king penguin. And one of the highlights of this trip for most guests on this tour is a visit to the king penguin breeding rookery, which is located at a place called Volunteer Point on East Falkland. And we'll make a full day trip out there to see them. They're really impressive birds, king penguins. They're the second largest penguin on Earth behind the emperor penguin. And we'll be able to hopefully see them coming in off fishing trips like this, surfing onto the beach, ready to feed their chicks. And they are the most colourful birds indeed, very, very attractive species of penguin. And here's a group of king penguins. In the foreground, you've got these brown coloured chicks, and in the background, you've got the adults. And Tim mentioned about them looking like busbies. Well, the interesting thing is that they're known as oakum boys at this stage, the chicks, through this brown color. Oakum was a chemical, not chemical, it was a compound that used to be used to fill in the gaps in the old sailing days when there was wooden decking. A chemical called oakum was used to fill the gaps between the planks on the decks of sailing ships, and the oakum, which is what it was called, was this lovely brown color. And so this is where these birds were called oakum boys by the early explorers to places like the Falkland Islands. And a few shorebirds to see while we're there. The bird top left is not a breeding bird, but it's very common on the Falkland Islands. This is a bird called the white-rumped sandpiper. Now, this bird breeds high up in the Arctic in the northern summer, and in the southern summer, i.e. at the time when we'll be visiting the Falklands, it's made its way all the way from the Arctic, all the way down to the Falkland Islands, where good numbers of them spend the winter months, the northern winter, around the coast of the Falkland Islands. But the other three are nesting birds on the Falklands. So top right, we've got a rufous-chested plover. Bottom left, we have the two-banded plover. And bottom right, we've got the Magellanic, another one for that Portuguese explorer, or otherwise known as the South American snipe. And all of those three are extremely common breeding waders in the Falklands group, and we should certainly see all of those birds there. The other opportunity would take a time, hopefully, to go and explore some sheep shearing. It's quite an interesting thing if you've never ever seen it done. There's an awful lot of sheep on the Falkland Islands. Believe it or not, there's over 500,000 sheep on the Falkland Islands. So sheep certainly way outnumber the number of people there. And it's quite fun to spend an hour or so just watching how these the skill that these people have in terms of relieving the sheep of their fleeces. But there's other birds to see as well. So we have 2 species of grebes to see on the Falklands. That's the one on the top left, that's silvery grebe, and the one bottom right, which is white tufted grebe. And top right, we have a species of tern called the South American tern. That's another reminder that we're only between 4 and, well, we're not too far off the coast of South America. And that's a reasonably common seabird to find around the coast. The one strange bird in many ways is the bird bottom left. This is a snowy sheathbill. It's a bird the size of a large pigeon or a small chicken. And these birds hang around penguin rookeries, and they'll feed on practically anything, including penguin guano. They are pretty interesting to watch in that respect, but they're very easy to identify, being snow white like this. The other species of penguin, hopefully we're going to find, is the macaroni penguin. This is the rarest breeding penguin on the Falklands, usually breeds in amongst rockhopper penguins. So we'll be keeping an eye out when we're looking in the rockhopper rookeries to find one. Reasonably easy to pick out though, because of this lovely, as Tim said, this lovely flamboyant yellow plumes, which actually led to their being called macaroni penguins in the first place. But of course, there's more to the Falklands than the birds, so we will also be looking out for any instances of mammals that we can come across. For example, there's a breeding population of South American sea lions, and we'll be visiting a colony that will be able to see a few of those. There aren't many of them, but we should be able to see them. They're a little bit difficult to see and difficult to spot. However, this one isn't. This is the largest seal in the world. This is the southern elephant seal, named because of that inflatable trunk, and the males have as a way of determining their breeding status in the breeding season. The males of this species can weigh up to 4 tons and can be anything up to 19 feet long. We'll have passed through, or rather we'll be there, I should say, at the end of the breeding season. But nonetheless, they are still, every now and again, you'll come across a male that is rather feisty and will be determined to try and chase off a potential rival, like this one is doing, hurtling along the beach. But this is a group of elephant seal pups where they've been born on this beach and this rocky inlet. And you might think they're incredibly safe here and they'll just take their time to wean, ready to go out to sea to become independent. Well, that's exactly what will happen, except these waters here do have a peril in the form of orcas. Orcas have been able to infiltrate into this little bay here and capture elephant seal pups as they're learning to swim in the shallows. However, it's only the young orcas that are able to do that because this water is so shallow that it would beach an adult. But nonetheless, there's every chance that we should encounter orcas going up and down the coast around this bay, hoping to catch any wayward elephant seal pups. So that also adds to the interest, if you like, of a trip to the Falklands. So I've raced through a little bit there, but I can tell by this individual that I've probably gone on too long. And so I'll call it a day there and say thank you very much for listening. This is also, by the way, this is a southern elephant seal pup who's obviously had enough of me talking this evening. So I'll hand over back to Sarah and leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was a fantastic talk. Really enjoyed looking through those photos there. And thank you to Tim too. So if I can ask the speakers just to turn on their cameras and start their videos, then we can go through some questions. So folks, do put your questions into the Q&A section if you have any, and we'll go through a couple now. So we've got a question for you, Paul, from Chris Garnett, who says, great talk on Spitsbergen. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate the weather is no more guaranteed than the wildlife, but are the blue skies and calm seas the norm when you go? And can you recommend it to someone who doesn't have great sea legs?
Well, I wouldn't say blue skies and calm seas are the norm, but it's not like Antarctica. You know, you're not riding huge waves on your crossing of the Drake's Passage. The weather in Spitsbergen tends to be a bit more stable than that. You often get a high pressure over the Arctic in the summer, so you get a mix of some clear days, some cloudy days, you know, some misty days. The seas can be a little bit choppy at times, but you're often more than not in the shelter of fjords and bays, or when you're out in the ice. Again, the ice dampens the effects of the wind on the sea. So you know, I've been to Spitsbergen a few times now, quite a few times. I'm not a great sailor myself, and I've really not had any problems. So no, I would recommend it even if you're not a great sailor.
Thanks, Paul. And I'd agree with that as well from my own experiences of going there. It's very calm. We have a question from Jeremy Kelsey for you, Kevin, who's asking, are there any introduced species on the Falklands, and are there any that are unwelcome?
Not aware of anything introduced. Interestingly, they do have barn owl there. I've never been able to establish how barn owl ever got found found its way to the Falklands, but barn owl is one of the most widely distributed birds on Earth. I'm not aware of anything that comes to mind. I don't know if you can think of anything, Tim. I mean, in terms of introduced.
No, I was struggling when it was asked. I was glad that I wasn't asked it. There used to be an endemic. That became extinct, didn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
when Charles Darwin was there in the 1800s, they had a species of fox, which was exterminated. Unfortunately, it doesn't occur there now. Soon after he was there, and the early gauchos who visited the Falklands, even before Darwin, they let loose a load of cattle, which became incredibly wild and were incredibly dangerous. You know, to the early explorers who went there, and the sealers and so on. That's a thing of the past, though. That doesn't happen anymore. The cattle have all gone, so it's sheep you've got to worry about now.
Presumably, though, there are rats on the island. There must be rats.
Rats. Well, yes, that would be true, Paul. Yes, rats. I was thinking of the larger things. Yeah, but rats, of course.
Thanks both. Paul, another question for you. This is from John Hall. Is there a lot of walking involved on the Spitsbergen trip, and how long will the walks be?
Well, that's very much up to you. What we tend to do on our trips is that we split the groups. So we split the groups normally into 3. So there's a group that pop around to the landing site, taking photographs, looking at the botany, the flowers, things nearby the landing site. There's a sort of medium group who will go on a gentle walk a little bit further away to get into look at wildlife and landscapes. And then there's often a hiking group that will go and hike up to the top of a hill or to a nice vantage point. And you're normally on shore for 2.5, 3 hours or so, something like that. But there's often opportunities to go back early if you want to. But basically, you do as much or as little walking as you want to.
Thanks, Paul. And another question for you. We have someone asking about single travelers and if we offer single cabins, or do you need to double up with another traveler?
Well, there are no sort of what you call single cabins on the boats that we charter. So normally people share, and we can find another single gentleman or single lady, of course, if you're a female, and that typically isn't a problem. If we're unable to find a cabin made for you, then we wouldn't charge you a single supplement. So you just get the cabin for single occupancy at no extra rate. But you've got to remember, you're not actually in your cabins very long on these cruises. There's always so much to see from the deck. Spitsbergen, they're taking you out after breakfast, you're back for lunch, you're out in the afternoon, you're back for tea, and you're often out again in the evening. So you get very little time to relax back in your cabin. You're just there ready to sleep and to change.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. You can spend, I've had clients on my trip say to me, you know, I wish I hadn't worried about the cabin so much because I've never been in it other than to change, shower and just sleep. And then you just find yourself out on deck all the time, especially on a trip like Spitsbergen when the sun is up the whole time. It's very difficult to want to go into your cabin and tear yourself away from the fantastic views and from the deck where you could be seeing wildlife.
Mm.
So another question, this is about equipment, Paul. Are jackets and footwear provided?
It depends on the ship. For the Ortelius, for cruisers on the Ortelius, and that applies to Antarctica and to the Arctic as well, they do provide Wellington boots, very comfortable muck boots that you can use when you're on board the vessel. For the MS Quest, they don't provide boots, but you can hire them, rent them in Longyearbyen, and it's pretty straightforward to do that. If you let us know that you want to rent boots, we can sort that out for you, and they'll pick you up in Longyearbyen, take you to their depot, get you kitted out, and then you're only takes half an hour or so to do that. The operators we use don't provide jackets, but to be honest, it's not really necessary. All you really need is your winter coat that you have here in the UK. If the sun's out and there's no wind in Spitsbergen, you can wander around in a t-shirt quite happily. But if it's windy and you're up in the pack ice, then you'll need all the layers. But all you need is a windproof Gore-Texy type jacket with some layers underneath, woolly hat, gloves. You don't need anything really special for a trip up to Svalbard.
Yeah, you don't tend to get cold really when you're walking. That's when you find yourself shedding the layers, I think. But it's when you're in the Zodiacs going to places or doing a little cruise around the sea cliffs where you're just close to the water and you've got a cooling breeze on you that you're going to want to be wearing a jacket. We've had a question asking how many passengers we take on both trips. I'm assuming this is the Arctic and Antarctic trips. So for Spitsbergen and the Antarctica.
Well, for Spitsbergen, as I say, in 2013, we're going to be using two vessels. The Quest takes 50 and the Ortelius takes 108. And for Antarctica, we're going to be using the Ortelius, which takes 108. So we've got our next charter. Sarah mentioned, sadly, we couldn't run the charter this year due to problems with COVID and travel restrictions. So our next full charter for Antarctica is January 24, and we've got dates and prices up online already for that. So 108 on the Ortelius, plus tour leaders and staff.
Thanks.
And on the Rembrandt, just in case you were interested, that's the maximum capacity for clients there is 33. So and again, we've got dates up on the website for 20. Well, we're running the trip in January. That's full, but the 2023 trip is now on the website as well.
Thank you, David. And a question for you, David, as well. How easy is it to take photographs of Northern Lights, and do you have any tips on how to do so?
It's relatively easy, and in fact, it surprises me these days how well some people do with the most modest of cameras, and even phone cameras can sometimes capture them. Particularly, I've been with clients who've taken some really very reasonable shots with iPhones, and I guess the software that they employ now manages to sort of stack pictures and get a reasonable image, even though you might be hand holding the camera. For the sort of more mainstream photography with digital SLRs, it's relatively easy, providing you're happy with just tweaking all the parameters, the shutter speed. You need to have a long shutter speed, typically of sort of 5 to 10, maybe 20 seconds at most, if it's a fairly dim display. So as a result, you need to have a tripod. So you need it to be solidly sort of mounted on a tripod. And if you can open the aperture as wide as it will go, so f2.8, f3.5, something like that, and use the sort of very fast sensitive settings for the ISO. So you're looking at perhaps 3200 or 6400 for that. If providing you can tweak all of the parameters on your camera to those, if you can set it on a sort of truly manual sort of setting, so you're able to set all of those parameters correctly, and have it on a tripod, you can get a reasonably good shots. In fact, I mean, yeah, people manage to get very, very, very good shots indeed. The cameras are far more sensitive now than they were 10 years ago when I started running these trips. So I'm continually impressed by, as I say, the results from quite small cameras, from compact cameras, from bridge cameras. Providing you can keep the shutter open for a bit, then you can usually get a good shot.
The one other thing I would add, David, as well, is it's best if you can get the put your lens onto infinity
Yes.
if it's got autofocus, and then switch off the autofocus, because in those light levels it hunts trying to find something to focus on. So that's the other thing that I would do.
Absolutely, yeah, I quite agree. You can sort of hear the camera sometimes sort of searching, if it's on an autofocus mode, searching for focus, and it can't find focus, and you really, as you say, I've seen people use gaffer tape to sort of set it on infinity and then gaffer tape the barrel of the lens so that it stays focused for the duration.
Yeah.
Thanks both. And Tim, a question for you, but I'll also open it up to Kevin as well. You've had some fantastic photographs that you've shown in your presentations this evening. Do you have any tips on how to obtain such photographs, what type of lens you use, etc.?
Do you want me to go first, Kevin?
Yes, feel free.
I take virtually all my pictures with the same prime lens. I have it's a 300mm lens with a 1.4 converter, so that's 420mm, and I keep it on all the time. And then I usually have a separate camera for wide angles and the landscape shots and things. So and I have it always on about as wide a aperture as I can get, which means I get lots of light, fast shutter speed, isolates it from the background. So that's what I do. I don't have any big fancy expensive equipment, but I'm always, or a whale breaches, I can just sort of take it out and fire straight away.
Yeah, I think for Antarctica, something like a 500mm lens is going to be overkill. You need something perhaps in the region of 100 to 400mm on the land. Certainly, that, you know, when you're in penguin rookeries and so on, as Tim said, if you had if you're having to carry something like a 500mm lens, it's far too heavy, far too cumbersome, and you'll never use it when you're ashore. It may be more useful on the back of a ship if you're photographing albatrosses coming behind the ship, but in reality, 100 to 400 plus or minus a 1.4 converter is all you're likely to need. The only other thing I'd say in addition to what Tim said is, me personally, I use a Sony system now. I use a 200 to 600, mainly in the UK, but if I was in Antarctica, I'd use 100 to 400. You can hand hold that combination, but nonetheless, I still use a tripod a lot of the time when I'm ashore.
Thanks very much, both Kevin and Tim. And I think that's all the questions answered. So thank you all very much for submitting those questions. And a big thank you to Paul, David, Tim, and Kevin for presenting for us tonight. And thank you all so much for joining from home. Our roadshow continues next week, where we'll be swapping our polar clothing for shorts and sandals, as we'll be taking you to Australasia, visiting Southern Australia, Queensland, Western Australia, and Papua New Guinea. That's next Tuesday, the 30th of November. Don't forget, you can also join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. when we've got our next virtual tour, which will be broadcast live from Le Brun in central France, where you can join our guides Jason and Tony as they position themselves to view hundreds of migrating cranes. Fingers crossed. So you can sign up for that on our website. My colleague Barney will be hosting, and we hope you can join us. Well, until the next time, folks, take care, and we'll see you again next week. Good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good evening. Thanks. Bye.